Welcome everyone to the Asian Voices Radio podcast, where you'll find real Asian American conversations, including all the topics you were too afraid to ask your Asian parents. I'm your host, Sheena Yap Chan, and our special guest today is a newscaster and also the founder of the VeryAsian Foundation, and I'm super excited to have her on today to share her story and wisdom. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Michelle Lee. Hi, Michelle. Welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Hi, it's great to hear your voice. I'm great. Life is just moving along, so it's all good.
Awesome. I know you've had a busy year. 2022 has been, phenomenal for you, but maybe we can do a recap of what happened on New Year's Day in 2022.
Oh, sure. Well, thanks for saying the year's been phenomenal. I feel like it's just gone by so fast. In January, I was working on New Year's Day, and I had mentioned what Korean people eat on New Year's Day because I was talking about what Americans eat, and I realized those are things that I didn't even eat growing up as a Missourian, growing up as an American kid. So it was greens for wealth, pork for progress, cornbread. It was basically like cornbread, beans, and pork. And so when I lived in the South, sure, I ate those as an adult, but I didn't really grow up that way. So I just happened to say, and I had dumpling soup because that's what a lot of Korean people do. I mean, technically, Korean people eat rice cake soup like tteokguk, but I said dumpling soup, and I had a really nice experience with a couple of people sending in great emails and just on social media. But then I had a voicemail, and the voicemail was a complaint from a woman saying that I needed to keep my Korean to myself, that I was being very Asian, very annoying. I needed to talk about what white people ate, and I also. She said, and if white people talked about what they ate, they would be fired. And so I shared that voicemail online. And sometimes I'm like, was that brave or was that stupid? I just did it because I was like, I just want people to hear this because it was so shocking to me. Definitely not the worst thing people have said to me over the years. But I just thought, wow, she's really sure of that. And so then shared it. It went viral. I ended up going on the Ellen show. Ellen ended up giving me quite a bit of money. And so she gave me $15,000. And with that money, we started the VeryAsian Foundation. On top of the fact that we raised some money for the Asian American Journalists Association in between the time that I was viral and going on Ellen, because when VeryAsian went viral, people started sharing all their meals, their family traditions, and then we made shirts, like VeryAsian shirts, and sold them all around the world, which was crazy, and then used that money to give to AJA.
Thank you so much for, sharing a recap of your story. I know every time I hear it, it just sometimes boils my blood because it's like, why is it we're not allowed to share what we're doing, our traditions, the things that we eat? We live in a country like Canada and America where it's a huge melting pot, right? And we're all immigrants and we should be able to share our own traditions so that we can learn from each other and live in peace and in solidarity. But I actually wanted to talk about your upbringing, right? Because you mentioned that you didn't grow up eating Korean food. You grew up eating Caucasian food most of the time, right? And I know you grew up as a Korean adoptee. I wanted to know a little bit more about that and what that was like.
Well, I think, being an adoptee is really wonderful in many ways and really painful in many ways because our life path was chosen for us, just like anybody else, really. But it is such a stark difference in where our birth countries are sometimes and where we end up landing. And, for me, it was very evident that I was different than the rest of the people in my family, the people I loved the most, my friendships, my schools, and then it became my workplaces and my college, just so many other, I was just othered so often, and that is fine. I mean, that could happen to anybody, adopted or not. But what it really showed me was if I was going to learn anything about Korean culture, it would have to be learned. And really, that's not isolated to adoptees either, because there are a lot of Asian Americans or Asian Canadians who, grow up with Asian parents, but the Asian parents didn't teach them certain things, right? So For me, we were always really intentional about incorporating Korean culture. So I went to Korean heritage camps. I went to Korea many times. My parents were always very supportive of me asking questions or me not asking questions. They always wanted to have that available for me. And, in the Midwest, you would think that it's hard to come by. It's not as frequent if you lived in a big city like Los Angeles or New York City, but it's all available. So my parents did the best that they could, and I really thought my childhood was pretty idyllic and beautiful and all these things. But also, I remember things that shaped who I was and became and motivated me. And some of that was racism. Some of it was like, well, I'm never going to live in the Midwest again because it was so racist. I mean, the truth is that's not how it was, but there were racist things that happened to me that were pretty painful. But I experienced racism everywhere. I mean, even in big cities with big Asian populations. We see that every day in the news. If you look at like the headlines on where people are getting brutalized and worse, they're not in necessarily small town America. They're in big towns in the United States with large Asian populations. So it's everywhere. But yeah, I grew up
Yeah.
I grew up very country and very white, so
Yeah.
to speak.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that. And it's great that your parents, allowed like, gave you gave you the chance to go out there and learn more about your Korean culture, where you came from. Because sometimes there are some parents, who adopt kids from Asia who just want don't want them to learn about their Asian heritage, right? Kind of like shield them from it.
Or feel threatened. I
Yeah.
think they feel insecure about it. And really, it's like, and I totally can understand that because when I met my birth family, that all happened on an accident, by accident, and kind of on a whim. And I remember my dad didn't know how to process those feelings. And so when I came back, he was like, but I'm still your dad. And I said, oh my gosh, of course you're still my dad. Like, what are you saying? But, he was anxious over that, so I definitely can understand this. But I raised you, I loved you, I'm here for you, um and I think that's just the difference of families, because my parents were really open about it, and they made themselves vulnerable as well. And we've always been able to talk about it, but not everyone is like that. I understand that, and there are also people who get adopted into bad situations as well. So we have to be. So I always want to be really respectful of everybody's experience because it's different.
Yeah, no, totally understand. Every person has a different experience, and I'd actually like to know a little bit about you meeting your family, right? Like your Korean family. What was that like? You said it happened as an accident. If you want to share a little bit more how that happened.
Sure. So when I was 18, I went to Korea and I was able to look at my file, and at the adoption agency, and I had asked if I could meet my birth mother if they would do a search, and they said, "Well, that's not how that works. Like you've got to go back to your home in the United States, fill out some paperwork, and if we find them, then we'll contact you, and then you can come back." And I was like, "That makes no sense," And I was 18, so I was like really emotional about it, because I hadn't really been that interested in locating my birth family because I just didn't really want to go there. I think, I mean, like mentally. And then, but there was something that happened to me when I like got off the plane, and was in the country and looking at every woman thinking like that could be my birth mother. So there was something that happened to me that was really, noticeable and profound. So when I had the chance to look at my file, I wanted to find my birth mother, but they said it was impossible. So the social worker did. So I said, okay. And I just left thinking this was not meant to be. But then a few days later, they had contacted me because the social worker did a search, like just a quick search, and was able to locate my birth mother. And then basically then she had to tell the rest of the family. So the short version is that my birth parents were still married, or were married, and they had two older daughters. Those older daughters were like 3 years old and 2 years old. And then my birth mother got pregnant with me, and my father was working on a ship away from home. So my mother was solo parenting two toddlers and one on the way. and she went to give birth in a free clinic, and no one visited her in the hospital. And I think she was like depressed, overwhelmed, maybe even still like, just dealing with like, just a lot, just really overwhelmed. And so she relinquished me there in the hospital. And when she had a chance to talk to my birth father, she told him that I had died at birth. And so then by the time he came home, he and my mother got pregnant again and had my youngest sister. So we're all about a year and a half or a year apart. My two oldest sisters are actually exactly 12 months apart. So my birth mother didn't have any time to recover mentally or physically she just kept cranking out kids. And so, me being a mother now of just one kiddo, I realize how hard that is with one. So she was under a lot of stress. And ultimately, she had to tell her husband, my birth father, that she had lied to him all those years. And then together they had to tell my sisters that they had another sister in the United States. I mean, quite shocking, really, if you could imagine getting that news. So, but now that's been more than half my life. And so, since then we've had multiple trips back and forth. I helped my second oldest sister move to the United States, which I'm really proud of. So we have this really big kind of Brady Bunch Korean American family. And the greatest things that have ever happened to me happened because of my birth family and my family. So like my two moms got to meet, before my mom passed away. And that was really amazing. So, and my dad over the summer got to meet two of my sisters. So that was really cool.
Awesome. I love this story. I feel like it needs to be like one of the stories in the Joy Luck Club, because they have a similar story too, right? Yeah, and sometimes we don't know what happens, right? Like you mentioned, your mom was all alone. She had to take care of two young kids plus one on the way, and this is just like an educated guess. She probably wanted a better life for you as well, right? She's like, how am I going to take care of three small daughters by myself while my husband is stuck in a ship? It's like you mentioned, it's not easy to take care of kids, and I love seeing all the dancing videos of your son on social media. It's just so cute, but like when you're a working mom or you're a working mom, you also have the foundation and you still have to take care of a kid. Like that's a lot, right? And people don't understand as women, there's a lot to do, right? We just don't do one thing. We do many things, regardless if we have kids or not. Um, and then you also mentioned like, you know, racism is everywhere. It's so true. And especially if, for women in journalism, like is they get a lot of threats, right? They get a lot of, racist, especially lately with the Stop Asian Hate movement. We've seen Asian newscasters sharing like, I'm being like called out different names, I'm being harassed. Have you gone through similar things as well?
Of course. Yeah. I mean, the thing that happened to me on New Year's Day, like I said, was not the worst thing that ever happened to me. I mean, I've had people call in to complain and use racial slurs, to get that damn whatever off the air. Um, I've had people get confrontational out in the field. Even saying things that were like microaggressions, like, oh, look, we got Connie Chung out here, that kind of stuff. But like, there have been times when I've been like physically scared, just because of some aggression or whatever. And then also fighting stereotypes within the news industry and the media industry has also been a 20-year battle, and even still, we have a long way to go. If you're looking at the United States, AAJA, the Asian American Journalists Association, looked at like the top 20 markets, top 20 television markets, and found that Asian Americans were grossly underrepresented on air, which is no surprise to me because for many years I have tried to be, a journalist on air and have been told throughout my career, we can't hire you. We already have an Asian person. It would confuse the viewer to have two Asian women at our station. There's still, even coming back to the Midwest, this idea, this misnomer that like Asian people don't exist in the Midwest. Trying to get corporations also to buy in that like Asian people live in top 20 cities outside of Los Angeles, outside of San Francisco, and have money to spend and want, media coverage and all these things. It's a hard buy-in a lot of times. Um, Even in St. Louis, where I am now, there aren't a lot of Asian folks on air. There might be one of us at each station. So it's a battle. It 100% is a battle to get people to understand, like, we've had belonging, since states have been, states have been around. I think I always joke in Missouri, for example, the state became a state like in 1820 something. And by 1860, so 40 years later, there was a Chinatown in St. Louis. And that Chinatown lasted for almost 100 years. But if you ask anyone, I mean, I ask people all the time because I do a lot of speeches and stuff. And I say, well, does anyone know about Hop Alley? Most people say no. And Hop Alley was the Chinatown that was here for a century. And people don't know about it. So that goes to show you how much history that is Missourian history or that is American history or whatever has been erased over time.
Yeah. Thank you so much, for sharing about all that, right? Becoming a journalist, becoming an Asian journalist. It's not easy, right? Especially as an Asian woman, talking about especially the racist attacks that's been happening. I mean, you're on the job. You could, you're like putting yourself in danger. And I think people don't understand what you go through, right? Or what most Asian female, well, not regardless Asian or not, female journalists go through, right? Because it's not just Asian females. And then the underrepresentation of Asian Americans and Canadians in every industry, right? Thinking having one Asian person makes the diversity cut, but that's not how it works, right? I remember there was a study from catalyst.org that I mentioned before that, Asian women only represent 2.7% of management roles in the US, right? And then when it comes to authorship in the US, Asian Americans only represent 4% of authors in all of United States in 2021. So it's very small, right? And of course, we're here trying to elevate our community, and sometimes it's an uphill battle. Like you take one step forward, two steps back, right? If I go out for a speech, I'm getting told my story's too specific, right? But what does that even mean? What does being too specific mean? Is it because I have smaller eyes? I have fairer hair? I mean, it's crazy that in 2022 still this things like this still happen, right? But it's also up to us to keep moving forward, to keep speaking up, to talk about things that aren't broadcasted in TV or even in history. And what to ask, what can we do to have more representation of Asian Americans, especially in broadcast journalism?
Well, I think that no matter what, we need to keep coming at it like in a multi-pronged approach, right? So it's like for me, it's, trying to keep sharing with newsrooms and my news managers, which they believe this too, I think, but also you got to push a little bit, like I deserve to bring my full humanity to the table. Um, if you can benefit off of me being a mom or being a woman, then you can benefit off me from being an Asian woman, or allow me to share my story. I don't think that's a problem. I think my station's always been really great about that. But I think that there are some stations that might not feel that way. There are some stations that shy away from race because they think it might be political. But I always say, it's not my fault that someone politicizes me. I'm very clear on who I am. I'm a journalist for everybody. But like, I can't ignore the fact and won't ignore the fact that I'm Asian and have these experiences. And then, so, you have to kind of like, keep pushing for representation, and understand and getting people to buy in that they're diverse too. Like, I've had people literally in groups say, well, I'm just a white guy. What do I have to contribute? And I said, well, have you ever been made fun of? Have you ever felt insecure? We all have something. None of us go unscathed. So use that experience, whatever it is, to have empathy for others and bring others along with you on your journey, and make space for others. At the same time, I think another approach is to create the content. When you don't have it, create it. And so, I know that you've created and written books and had, events and workshops, and that's where we are with the foundation. creating like VeryAsian summits and panel discussions and programming. And we created the May Book Project. And then also, just recently, I wrote a children's book, A VeryAsian Guide to Korean Food. And it's a kid's book about Korean food. There aren't very many out there. And so I'm really honored that I got to do that and work with an Asian American female publisher. So, there are things that I'm doing that's, really intentional. Not to like be very Asian. Sometimes I want to be subtly Asian. Sometimes I don't want to be anything. I just want to be mom, but being able to bring that identity into my space is really important to me. And also I think it's important to the next generation, to my son, so that he can see himself in spaces, because I didn't get to see myself in all those spaces. Making room for people should not be a threat. Like we all deserve to have have a seat at the table.
I love that, and it's so true, right? I mean, it's crazy that we still go through this feeling like we don't belong just because, we look a certain way. We can't even call ourselves American or Canadian because it's like there's a standard, and it's like, what standard is that? We all came in as immigrants except for like indigenous people, so we should all be able to live, harmoniously, peacefully, learn from each other's traditions, and be okay to show up as our true selves. Because if not, then this is what the cycle has been going on forever and ever.
Well, also, but what is the standard? Because the
Yeah,
world standard, if you're looking at the world population, Asian people make up
yeah,
make up the majority of the world population. So, I mean, I'm always like, well, who's the standard? Because
exactly.
I think by numbers alone, we're the standard. I mean, all jokes aside, to me, it's always funny when you start buying into the fact that you're not the standard. I feel very much the standard, so I feel above standard sometimes, so I don't want to call myself just standard, but it's this idea of like, who's calling the shots on what the standard is. And that goes back to the VeryAsian origin story, being able to say that American food could only be pork and cornbread. Not true. It can be dumplings, it can be noodles, it can be whatever. And when people try to politicize, the work that, I'm trying to do just as a human being and as a journalist, I always say the whole point of being VeryAsian is that we get to say we're VeryAsian is very American. And that we all have an opportunity to bring our full selves to the table, and just cut out the politics, because it's not about that at all.
Yeah, I think that, it was just great words of wisdom that you mentioned. I just actually have one more question for you. Yeah, any words of advice for those who are thinking of pursuing a career in media as a broadcaster or reporter?
Well, I think really it has to be the basics that have always been the basics. It has to be about having curiosity. It has to have a foundation in writing. You have to have a foundation in having empathy for people, and an ability and a curiosity that will lead you to good storytelling. There's so many times when people try to peg me as one thing or another, and I'm always like, but I'm open to both sides. Are you? Things that like, okay, well, this makes sense to me. Where's the middle ground? I think being able to have a common sense approach to things also helps. But that doesn't mean that we don't experience life. So that doesn't mean that we don't come into a story with bias. But I want to be as straight in the center as I possibly can. Like I said, I'm a journalist for everybody, but I do have lived experiences as a human being, and so I think anyone who wants to get into journalism or broadcasting or media, make sure that you're coming at it from those elements, like storytelling, empathy, curiosity. But I think the next generation of journalists and broadcasters and entertainers and people in media will be people who will be able to also bring their lived experiences to the table and make it a forefront too.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that great advice. Actually, I have one more quick question for you. Is there any few words to adoptees like yourself struggling with self identity? What words of wisdom would you give to them?
I think it's really important to just try to try to push out the noise and just be you. I mean, for a long time, I thought that I had to be a certain kind of Korean person. Um, and, what I really ended up finding was that that person didn't exist. That was me pretending to be a Korean person. Any American or probably any Canadian, like let's say we're just going to go with Korean Canadian or Korean American, who goes back to Korea does not fit in. They are not Korean Korean. You know what I mean? So it's like this idea of like just understanding like you just are who you are. I tried to hang out with a bunch of Korean kids when I was in college, and I took Korean lessons because I had just gotten back from Korea. So I was learning Korean and studying it every day for 2 hours a day. And these Korean kids really gave me a lot of hell because they were like, you're too whitewashed. You don't hang out. You're not diverse enough. And I said, you're talking to me in a science library with all other Asian kids. You're only speaking Korean. So where's your diversity? Also, you were born in Kansas. I was legit born in Korea. I was like, don't make this a competition because that's not what it is. But
Yeah.
I felt so bad about myself because I was like, well, maybe they're right. Maybe I am whitewashed. Maybe I am all these things. And then I was like, but I had white parents. Like, what do you want from me? We can't control where we were born. We can't control who we were born to. And unless we're living in like legit Korea, we probably have a different relationship with Korea or our origin country than people who live there now. And that is okay. Like I said, I mean, you can be as subtle or very Asian as you want. I'm not into purity tests. The difference is when I go on television or when I go out into the street, like people see a Korean face, they look at the packaging. They don't know how I was raised or where I was born or all those things. And so I think that's where the connection point is. And I also think as Americans or as Canadians, we all have a connection in that sense. Asian Americans have a different experience than, say, my sister, who now is a Korean living in America. And we just have to like lean into our identities. And, we can't be something that we're not, and we can't be something for everyone. Every time I go to Korea, it's like, oh, if you could just have some plastic surgery and maybe tan less and maybe lose 50 pounds, and I'm like, I don't want to be what, so we're just who we are. And at some point you have to live for yourself. I am who I am. I am just a woman named Michelle. I'm a mom, I'm living my best life or trying to. And I think that is what adoptees struggle with because we've just lived multiple identities.
Yeah, I love that advice. That can go for any person listening to this. So thank you so much. And where can listeners find you? Make a donation to Very Asian Foundation. If you can just share any links or social media profiles.
Oh, sure. Well, it's VeryAsianFoundation.org, or you can just search for Very Asian Foundation on social. So sometimes we're the Very Asian Foundation, sometimes we're just Very Asian Foundation, but it's always the foundation keyword that you'll find.
Awesome. Well, first off, I want to thank Michelle Lee today for joining us. To learn more about Michelle, as she mentioned, please visit VeryAsianFoundation.org. If you have any questions for future guests or topics, we'd love to hear from you. Also, be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, as well as follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Asian Voices Radio is produced by Asian Culture and Media Alliance, a nonprofit that empowers our API community with a voice through media arts. If you would like to support our program and make a donation, please visit AsianVoicesRadio.com. Thank you for listening. I'm Sheena Yapchan. Please join us next week for another exciting and thought-provoking Asian Voices radio show. Until then, take care, everyone.